Om Shanti. Welcome to Interview with the Raja Yogi. And our topic this evening is the idea of moving from complexity to simplicity. And as usual, we'll start with a reflection. Sitting quietly, I immediately go into my inner space of thoughts. And I bring in front of my mind's eye the image of a desk in an office. I can see the surface of the desk, the working space. And I begin by imagining the surface of a desk is completely covered with papers, files, folders, all sorts of items in a jumbled state covering the surface of the desk. This was a space that was intended for me to be able to create, problem solve, innovate, get the task done. And yet the surface of the desk is so busy, there's no space for me to work in a clear and orderly way. And so I start to organize the surface of the desk, forming categories, putting things in their place, and perhaps letting go of papers that are no longer necessary. Clearing a space, organizing a space where I can work effectively. And now I consider the space of my mind, how cluttered it can become, how filled with a jumble of thoughts, and that powerful capacity of the mind cannot work at its best. Its capacity is compromised by the jumble, the disarray, the clutter. And so I begin just by organizing the space of my mind, letting go of the thoughts that aren't necessary or relevant. Organizing, categorizing, simplifying the space of my mind so it can do what it does best: create, think, innovate. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Welcome to Interview with the Raja Yogi. So, a very useful reflection to take us into this topic. And first of all, even just the very topic, just what we chose to articulate as the topic wasn't actually the original topic that we wanted to actually share. We just didn't know if it would actually feel meaningful to others. And actually, I think what we were going to call it was from expansion to essence. And I know Judy really loves this topic of essence.
Mhm.
So, the reason why I bring that up is because sometimes when you hear the word complexity to simplicity, it doesn't necessarily always have a good response, maybe from the face of ego. Sometimes we hear simplicity, we think of rudimentary, we think of apathy, we think of superficial, we think of neglectful. So, what do we mean in this case of simplification with respect to Raja Yoga?
There's a couple of phrases that can have a negative connotation to them, but once I came into Raj Yoga, I thought, this is great. One of them is brainwashing, and the other is simple minded. And both of those are not thought very highly of in the usual way, but I realized I do need my brain to be washed. And there's such genius in having a simple mind. So there's a quite well known quote that it's very easy for us to make things complicated, but it takes quite a bit of wisdom to simplify. So I think that everyone sometimes can feel the weight of our multitasking, complicated lives and crave a level of simplicity. Ironically, all the technology we've developed was designed to simplify our lives, and yet the amount of complication is remarkable. The expansion is remarkable, printing everything in triplicate, etc. And so what happened there, and we eventually discovered that it's not about the technology, but always the users of the technology, and specifically the character of the users. So I think we can understand that life was simpler when there was loyalty and trust and honor. And I remember going to have some body work done on the car, and I know that Nora knows this soul as well. Going to get some body work done on the car, and so I took it in, and he looked at the vehicle to do an assessment and let me know what it would cost. And he looked at everything, and then he quoted an amount that was very reasonable. And I said, and this was the first time I was working with the soul. I said, okay. And so I was expecting the next step that always happens, which is some sort of invoice or quote printed out, signed, etc. And instead, he just extended his hand. And I looked at it for a while because I was delighted, but also shocked. Because, of course, the idea was that I would shake his hand and the deal was done. And it reminded me of simpler times when there was so much trust, so much character, that we didn't require all of this complication. So to me, simplicity is connected to a level of character, a way of operating that doesn't require a lot of expansion and complication. So I find an extremely attractive quality, and it was connected by Daddy Genki, the previous administrative head, with the two qualities of cleanliness and truthfulness, specifically cleanliness and truthfulness of character. As it said, if you lie, it takes a lot of work to sustain that lie. If you tell the truth, very simple, not a lot of complexity required. So it's to me connected to a very specific quality of character, of operating.
For most, if not all, their lives are very complex right now. They
Mm-hmm.
feel complexity.
Mm-hmm.
It can sometimes feel like a pretty, sensitive topic, as if you don't understand. Um, things are very complicated. So, in terms of when we're talking about cleanliness and truth, How does Raja Yoga help me to simplify things without feeling like I'm just dropping everything and neglecting things, running away? Because many of us are aware that there is actually a reputation of spirituality about just run away from things, stay on cloud nine, just have really nice thoughts and hope for the best. That is a perception,
Mhm.
common perception of spirituality.
Yeah. When we look at Raj Yoga, it's extremely practical. And what it's helping me to do is when we say simplicity, based on recognizing a very authentic sense of self and my value system, it's actually going to help me to prioritize. And there's always simplicity when we prioritize what's really important. And I start to recognize the complexity is actually this kind of structure that's sustaining elements of my life that either are no longer necessary or even damaging. So I could be doing a lot of things that actually are just supporting ego. And through spirituality and gaining wisdom and power or courage, I'm able to start to prioritize and let go. It's not running away, it's releasing what really, again, isn't necessary or even damaging.
From your experience, have you felt it takes, a sense of meaningfulness to really let go and even power to let go? So it's not, again, our own versions that may actually be quite violent.
Yeah, so the first lesson of Raj Yoga is to consider yourself to be a soul. And it has been memorialized as opening the third eye. But what it actually does is it's opening this capacity to see, experience, feel in a very different way. So when I say I'm going to consider myself to be a soul, it's going to create this whole different way of seeing a huge, what we call reframing of of how I'm operating in my day-to-day life, actually. So it's not running away from day-to-day life, but reframing it. And through that reframing, that realization, that alone is a great power realization. Through that realization, then I start to make different choices.
I know this has come up perhaps in one of the earlier sessions, but for maybe someone who hasn't joined one of those earlier sessions, how can I tell this difference of reframing versus let me put this in a different light
Mm,
so I can see things in a different way?
right. So, one way that we've talked about realization is, not trying to change things so that it looks different, but everything stays the same, but I'm changing myself or my sense of self so I see differently. So everything else can stay exactly the same. I'm not trying to manipulate anything or rationalize anything. I am literally changing my sense of self. So I see. So it's actually the self that I'm reframing. And because our sense of self is the center of our universe, our life, the moment I shift that, it shifts everything, my experience around everything. So one example we sometimes use is imagine you go through your life and then you suddenly um, someone comes to your door with official papers and says that you're actually the son of a king of some faraway land, and you're completely convinced. This is a deep reframing of the self. It's going to shift how you feel, what choices you make. And there have been many storylines that have explored this idea of a reframing of self. I know the Truman Show is a very good example of this, but this idea of suddenly discovering you're a completely different sense of self, it will change everything. Nothing out there needs to change. Just the reframing of self will change your relationship with everything.
It sounds like from what you're sharing, it is really about a shift in reality versus just trying to cope.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is quite a while ago, but there was a princess in this in China actually, but in a small, a place that was basically no longer existing. But for many centuries, she's had to her whole, I guess, lineage of her royal family had to go underground, so to speak. So eventually, when whatever had to happen in the events that she had to reveal herself. Um, Her husband didn't know that she was a princess. And I was reminded about that because it's not like he's trying to see things a different way, like his complete life has completely changed because his sense of self, his sense of identity with respect to everything. I know that's a limited example, but I think sometimes it's about, again, when students are trying to grasp, is soul consciousness what I'm experiencing? Is it just imagination? How do I know if I'm going into the real experience?
Yeah. One of a very beautiful experience that I think many of us have been exposed to is when astronauts are launched into outer space, which I always thought was a remarkable thing to do. But they will go off into outer space, and then they will send back recordings and pictures. They'll now they can relate it in real time, but we sort of got to see things through their new perspective. So, and many had, sort of suggested it was like a spiritual experience for them, and definitely connected to the topic of complexity into simplicity, because from that sense, that new position of themselves, that perspective, and looking back on the earth, they really were in awe of the complexity and wondered why it existed. It looks so simple from outer space. We are all on one planet together, period. All of those details of why this conflict or that it made no sense from that perspective. And that always stayed with me when I'd hear those stories. And I think that's really what spirituality does. It takes us into what we call the unlimited. So I know that I am having a real experience of soul consciousness because there is naturally simplification happening. I know I've actually shifted.
So, when you're using that example, and there was an astronaut who had shared that, and in terms of transferring it to a spiritual understanding, it is a physical distance from the planet, and it elicits such broad feelings, I suppose you can say. What does that feel like on a spiritual level? That's physical distance. What is it that as indicators, what am I experiencing that would be able to give me such a broad understanding that really helps me to really let go, see things in a different light?
The term we use is detached observer, but what we're reframing is the two words I and mine. So we'll often use the example of the actor, and I do remember the experience of, you know, when you're on stage and you're caught up in all the details of your part and the props and the people. And then watching from the wings is a completely different experience. So, what's happening in spirituality is we're kind of stepping out of the roles and the costumes and the props off stage. And so, this changing of I and mine, which we call detached observer, there is, when I'm not in that, there's so much reactivity, there's so much attachment, there's so much going on that there's going to be a lot of complexity, a lot to think about. But when I'm able to step outside of those limited or temporary senses of self into a more, we say, eternal or timeless or unlimited sense of self, it automatically organizes everything in a different and simpler way. So again, even, it always sort of find it fascinating that in our interactions with the seniors who have spent so much time in that very, we use the word detached, but very true place. You'll send them a note about an issue and you go on and on because you want them to have all the details. And then what you'll get back is a sentence or two. And I've always found it so refreshing because I know that it's not that they're mocking your lengthy story, but I just know that they're in a place where they actually can see very clearly to the seed of things and not be distracted by all of the stuff going on. They can just see right to the seed of things and speak to that. So the idea of, again, we can say detached observer or objectivity or a different perspective. That's what soul consciousness is trying to give me. It's a lot to do with my practical life. And we know the soul is experiencing that when they start to feel that simplicity in their thinking and in their speaking and even their spaces in which they live. They just are pulled to simplify because they're just feeling things in a very different way.
Can you share a bit more about the I and mind piece? Because that seems to elude many in terms of um, the implications of how I am defining my sense of self and what I call mine, how that can actually lead to more complexity.
When I think I am the physical body, there's a lot of things attached to it. It's quite complicated. The body itself has several features such as gender, culture, age, language, on and on it goes. And then you attach to it beliefs and relations and possessions. There's a lot. It's almost like hundreds of invisible strings attached to the self when I think I'm the body. And my mind is trying to maintain all of those. So it's very busy. So this idea of I am the body has hundreds and hundreds of minds connected to it.
Like references of identity.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's really trying to, that's the whole, all connected to that sense of I, or thinking I'm the body. So all these different things develop. And it takes a lot to sustain that. So that's why we're thinking so much. All of those minds are requiring thoughts to sustain. The moment I think I am a soul, it literally, all the mind changes. And it doesn't mean I have to step away from anything. I can still interact with everything. I just don't think it's mine. So I'm driving a car and I take care of the car, but I don't think it's mine. So if something happens to the car, it's okay. I can still respond, take care of it, but there isn't all of that emotion, reactivity, fear, worry that goes with the word mine. And I think this is one of the most challenging things. It's actually memorialized in the Gita for souls, for us to grasp, because we don't shift consciousness. We only theoretically kind of get it, but we don't actually go there. Is this idea of acting and interacting whilst being free from the action and interaction. It takes up the whole Gita, all 18 chapters, trying to understand this balance of, you want me to act or you don't want me to act. What do you want me to do? I don't get what you want. You want me to act, but you don't want me to be affected by the, like, I'm not sure how, it's one or the other. It seems like a paradox for all 18 chapters. And the minute I think it won't make any sense to us, it won't seem possible until I become soul consciousness. I shift the I. It won't work theoretically. I actually have to go there. So this, I think, is the greatest challenge for students of spirituality, is to shift the I so they can actually feel, oh, it is possible to interact with everything, have relationships, everything, and they're not bondages. I know everything will come and go. It's all temporary. I can't own it. I can't own people. I can't own temporary things. It all comes and goes. But I can interact with it in a very healthy way and then let it go. And I'm fine. And they're fine. Everything's fine. So, this shifting into this other paradigm, we resist a lot, but it's extremely complicated to live in the body conscious. It takes a lot of our energy to sustain all those different minds in our head. There's a lot of emotional connected to it. And some say, is it an unfeeling place? No, wonderful feelings. If you actually become soul conscious, you'll discover that. So it's really challenging for us to get that shift from a very complicated paradigm to a very simple one. But both are ways of living.
So was it easy to shift?
It takes a lifetime, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, I think if I look at the seniors, I think it's an ongoing process of refining it, but we definitely can see that they're living in that soul consciousness by the way they operate. So they're just, creating stability in that stage really over time. But definitely they've understood.
I think you've helped to illuminate, that constant question I have brought up, just on behalf of those watching, in terms of what is the quality of my effort and my exploration of soul consciousness. If I'm just imagining a point of light in the center of my forehead, if I'm just trying to repeat that phrase, I'm a soul, I don't know if I'm going to be able to really transform that experience of I and mine.
The ultimate goal of Raj Yoga, and I think any transformative practice, is to look at definitely the way we live our lives, the type of actions we perform. That's the ultimate goal because that's connected to something called happiness. Happiness is a direct function of how we behave. It is not a reaction to what's going on outside. I know we think it is, but it's actually a function of how we behave, how we act. So that's the goal of spirituality and the pursuit of peace and happiness, to look at what are my activity or behavior like. So if I go back to the actor, it's very interesting. The actor on the stage, they're going to be asked to act or behave in a certain way. In this example, as a certain character in a play or movie. And their question is, okay, how do I get into that role? How do I become that character? What's the method? So they're always trying to, either on their own or with the director, figure out the way to authentically become, act like that being. And what Raj Yoga is looking at is the method to authentically act like a healthy human being, or truly ourselves. So the suggestion being that we actually stopped being our authentic self. It's the exact reversal of the limited example of an actor. An actor in a limited example is themselves and they're trying to act like someone else. We are acting like someone else, and Raj Yoga is trying to get us back to acting like ourselves. And if we can do that, because of course our concept of the soul is that it's intrinsically good or has a good character, that it performs a certain quality of action when it's soul conscious. So then that happiness will be there because of the quality. So Raj Yoga is giving me the method to come back to my true character.
What is the whole point then? Is I bring myself into a simplicity of when I realize myself to be a soul. I mean, given the way the situation in the world is like
Mm.
right now, um, that this clearly isn't about coping. So, what simplicity does it help me to respond, or how I see things, given my awareness of being a soul is deepening?
I really liked, we had a little class just before this, and it was exploring this idea of not thinking, and that is not possible. So the clarification is not thinking waste. And so going into a very simple way of thinking, it's been said that 80-90% of our thinking is waste, pretty much like our activity on the planet, a huge amount of waste, physical waste that we're producing. So in our head, there's a lot of waste too. And so this idea of moving to a place, which would be a very simple place, or just not thinking things we don't have to think. When I am body conscious, I am really pulled to engage in a lot of thoughts that are worry, fear, anxiety in response to situations like we are experiencing. Now, we know in our head that these are completely useless. To worry and fear, etc., isn't helping. We know that, but we can't stop. So it's especially relevant now to be able to explore a way of seeing things that helps me to stop the waste, the worry, and the fear, and gives me a very productive response to what is going on. And so, how, it doesn't work to try to repress it or stuff it in there. It doesn't work. It's going to be a pretty deep shift in consciousness and perception to really genuinely be able to transform my quality of thought. So, what does it look like for someone who's is so conscious in a situation like this? How do they think? Very differently. Not only are they not worrying or anxious, but they're actually having very peaceful and calm and content thoughts because, again, being so conscious means I'm going into eternal sense of self. So there's just this deep feeling that whatever happens, I'll be okay. So it really helps us not to go into a lot of unnecessary thought.
So when you were sharing, I was just really feeling that that experience of being an eternal being has to be very real.
Yeah,
It can't just be a thought. It can't be just something, okay, I am eternal. Okay, remember, I'm eternal. No, no, it's okay. I'm eternal.
I'm eternal, but yeah. So it obviously always, I know we keep coming back to that, but it has to be genuine. Really, this deep feeling that I'm fine, we're eternal, we're fine, we're fine. And I really enjoyed recently, we were in an interview situation, and actually, no, I'm sorry, it was a conversation with another BK student. And they said something that I thought was really beautiful because they themselves are still working professionally, a lot of very, very busy with their work, and then other responsibilities within the Brahma Kumaris organization. So, really full, crazy full, one could say very complicated life. And what they shared is that they said, I hope that I won't, if we pass into another phase, I hope I don't look back on this period of restrictions and quarantine, etc. I hope I don't look back and said, I wasted my time. I missed an opportunity because I was so caught up in the complications that I didn't see the simple thing that this time was trying to invite me to do. And what this time is inviting us to do is to sort of stop and assess what foundation is my entire life built on? Is it built on a foundation that shakes when something happens in the world? Because things will always happen. Things will not always go the way you want. So, what is the foundation of my life built on? Very simple question. And we're being given this opportunity to explore it. Am I wasting this opportunity because I'm so busy just resenting it or anxious about it or just wanting it to be over? I've missed it. And then another situation comes and I didn't use this time to really reinforce my foundation. So, very simple thing that we're being invited to explore. What is the foundation of my life? And is it solid?
Which is very much connected to then what is my experience of myself. So just perhaps it may only be one more question,
Mm-hmm.
but when there is that clarity and simplicity, if you can share from your own personal experience how that affects your response in In situations where there is a need for healthy responses.
I remember, and that's the question. I told this story before. I know you've heard it before. So you can have a nap for a while. Just go and have a
That would be nice.
yeah. Just have a nap. It's okay. Um, but I was remembering when I was teaching a fitness class, and there was a soul in the class that was known to have epileptic seizures. And so we're teaching the class, and I look, and the soul is down on the ground having a seizure in the back of the room. And there's many people in the class. There's a lot going on, and they're having a seizure in the back of the room. And there really is no staff support nearby, so you're kind of on your own. And we're very far from a phone, so again, there's going to be a lot of interesting things to this scenario in terms of response. So this happened, and I remember I didn't go into I didn't go into a spiritual state. I tried to respond in a very worldly way. And I remember feeling so much complication in terms of what should I do? I'm getting different feedback. It got very complicated. It didn't feel healthy at all from my perspective, a healthy response. It was just very complicated, not very productive. I don't think it actually went in the direction that anybody wanted, like felt good about. And it was just very interesting how just disoriented and complicated it felt. But ironically, the exact same thing happened because I remember saying, if this ever happens again, which I would not wish, but if it did, I would just go immediately. Step one, spirituality. Immediately get myself into a spiritual alignment. As it happened, the exact same thing happened a week later. Teaching the class, same soul goes down an epileptic seizure. And I remember I had vowed, if this happens again, the first thing I'm going to do is not go to worldly stuff. I'm going to go into spiritual alignment. And I remember just the feeling deeply, like not faking or anything, not just a thought, but deeply going to, I am a peaceful soul. And that whole world that opens up when you have that experience, very simple, just that one thought. It was incredible how things unfolded after that. I don't even remember having any thoughts. It was like some kind of dance. I vaguely remember directing someone to go do this and someone else to go do that, turning down the music, kind of managing the rest of the class. And I know all that happened, but it felt very all it felt was peaceful. Just that one simple experience drove. Felt so healthy, so healthy. I know I had to say things and do things, but I didn't have to think through everything and question and second question everything. It was just guided by this one simple energy or alignment, and everything unfolded very beautifully. So, complicated situation, needing a healthy response by going into a simple space.
I know we're coming close, actually past the end, but can
Hmm.
you share there was someone who said something to you?
Right, yeah.
Because that I found really meaningful with respect
Yeah,
to this
it
as
was
well.
interesting. So after it all ended and everyone left, um, one soul stayed back and came up to me and said, What just happened here? And I said, well, you were there, but I'll remind you. So and so went down. She said, no, no. She says, I know about the seizure and everything. I was here. But what just happened here? I said, well, I'm not quite sure what you mean. She says, like, it was really weird. Like, all of this happened, but it felt so peaceful. And I was very surprised because I thought it was just my own little inner experience. But she said, yeah, no, it was so peaceful. Even though it was just so complicated, it was so peaceful. And I will just end by saying we've been given, we're starting to get very clear, we've been getting very clear directions over the months from the spiritual headquarters, but we recently got one that really touched me. And what it said is it talked about the need for silence, true silence, integrated silence, not isolation where you go into a cave, but the simplicity of thought and speech and action. And what it said, if something comes up, a difficulty or a problem, rather than thinking a lot and analyzing your way, trying to analyze your way to a solution, just go into that very simple, peaceful space and just stay there. And it actually will help or put you in a place where you can very simply address the situation. Trust more the power of simplicity and of peace. Trust that more in terms of addressing things. Make your life simpler.
Well, thank you, Judy. On behalf of others who are watching, at least I felt this is very, very useful. Hearing the practical experiences, hearing about the how this is so relevant, and just a reminder, we're actually taking all the different capacities that as we souls have, but not breaking them up as something irrelevant. And really, these capacities with you deeply do increase if I'm practicing soul consciousness. And so, apologies for the time, but I think it was
Mm.
worth it. So,
Mm.
if you're okay, we can
Mm-hmm.
transition to our little reflection.
As I go through the day, my mind is creating thousands and thousands of thoughts. Thoughts about what I need to do, thoughts about situations, different tasks, the pressure of time. There's a lot of noise in my mind. And if I'm lucky, there will come a point in the day that I might realize out of all those thousands of thoughts, I seem to have lost the single most important thought, myself. I become lost in the complexity of my thinking during the day. And so moments of reflection allow me to shift from all those complex thoughts to the one single thought that matters the most, remembering who I am. The most important thought in my day is to remember the self. I, the soul, the one who possesses all qualities. Quality of life comes from me. It's like going from an entire tree to the seed, from the expansion to the essence. The most valuable aspect of my life, the part that gives value to my life, is me, the soul, coming right to the seed of the self and experiencing the peace and the lightness within the self, and sustaining that experience of the seed as I go into the day, making my day simpler and yet of such deep quality. Om Shanti.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you for those joining us. I'll pass it back again to you, Judy, for our upcoming sessions for this week.
So unbelievably, we are at December 8th. And so, what we have remaining this week is another couple drop in meditations Thursday and Sunday night. Sunday is a full hour. And we also have a workshop coming up this Sunday, December 13th. It's about the sanctuary within, and it will be from 12 to 1:30 p.m. on Zoom. So the details are on our website. You're welcome to go there, see how to register, get the details. So that's what's going to be happening this week. We have another interview on Thursday night. I think it's about the chart, part 2. So again, all the details on the website. But thank you so much for joining this session, and we look forward to seeing you again. Om Shanti.